Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're going to be painting a section of Onett from Earthbound. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. Like my other Earthbound paintings, I've decided to go in a different direction. So here I kind of thought about how the cliffs look like the cliffs of Moher or the cliffs of Dover, and so I decided to use my photographs I've taken of the cliffs of Moher, because we went there a few years ago, to start to draw them in and kind of use those as the Onett cliffs. And then on the first one here, I've put the back of the house that's for sale, and if you've played the game, you know that the back of the house is totally gone and you can see into it, so I've drawn that in here. There's also a saxophonist on the cliff, so I drew him in, and I wanted it to be a bit funky, kind of like jazz music. So I drew in all these swirls, and I thought it would look really neat if I did the sky in a bright, vibrant, super saturated color, but more in Van Gogh style. But I'm not going to do the entire thing in Van Gogh style, just the sky, because I thought that's kind of where the music is going and flowing towards. So the first thing I'm going to do is start to draw everything in, because I want to make sure it's exactly how I want it to be in the final piece, and I want to make sure things get lined up correctly. So I'm going to start by drawing it in with chalk pastel, and then we'll start working on the colors. To fill in my horizon line, I have to figure out where I want to put it, and on this painting I want to put it right in the middle, just because you're only going to see like this much of it over here, and I want to make sure I have quite a bit of sky, but I also have space to fill in the cliffs. So my 18-inch canvas puts me right at 9 inches for the halfway mark, so I just mark that in, and then I take my T-square and line up that mark, and then just draw the line. Now I'm not going to take it all the way across my canvas, just because everything is going to cover it over here, and there's no point. I'm only going to see, like I said, this much of it, so I just drew a little bit of it. Having filled this much in, I really was going from my sketch, because I did draw it proportional to my canvas. So my canvas is 18 by 24, and my sketch here is exactly the same proportions. So I have 6 inches here and 8 inches here. And then I started to measure things in. Like, I figured out how far out this cliff came and did the math for the proportion to figure out how far this same spot should be. So it's turned out pretty good, but once I have it here on the canvas, it is a lot bigger than my sketchbook, and I do like how the cliffs are looking, but I feel like the house is a little funky, so I'm going to go ahead and work on changing that up before I move on to doing the swirls in the sky. For the swirls in the sky, they're all going to originate from the bell of the saxophone, so that's going to end up being right here. The next thing I'm going to do is start to block all of those in using chalk pastel, and because I am going to do kind of blues and stuff for the sky, it's best if I use blue because it'll blend in with my paint later. To start filling in the sky, I think it would be easiest for me if I start to fill in kind of a base layer first, and then start to bring some of the dotting on top. So I've mixed up a light yellow here with some primary yellow, titanium white, and just a touch of cadmium yellow hue, because I felt it was a little too cold and I wanted it to be warmer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of start in the middle of all these swirls with this yellow, and just kind of fill it in first to give it a good base layer, so that when I go ahead and start doing my next stuff, that this is already here and I don't have to worry about covering every single part of the canvas. For the color scheme of the sky, I'm using an analogous color scheme, which are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So I have yellow, and I'm going to go towards the warm side of having orange and red, and I'm going to go all the way down kind of into a blue-violet. So it's going to kind of be this half of the color wheel over here. So I started with yellow, and then my next color is going to be orange, and as I go ahead and keep doing my layers on the sky, I'll get the yellow-orange in between them for the tertiary color, but the orange is going to kind of go next. So I'm going to go ahead and start to block this in on both sides. It's going to go on the left and the right of all of the yellow. After I put this orange down, I thought it was a bit too dark, so I remade it up with a bit of a lighter orange. You can kind of see the difference here. So I'm going to go ahead and use this one on everything else, and by then this should be dry and I can go back over it. Working my way around the color wheel, the next one is red, and it's kind of turned into a bit of a hot pink color, which is fine because it's a bit more cool than something like a cadmium red would be for the magenta. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of keep doing the same thing, fill this around the edges, and then move on to my next colors. Moving on to my violet color, I have a Dioxazine purple with a little bit of the titanium white, and I'm just going to keep going around the edges. My last color is blue, so I'm just going to go ahead and fill this in, and I know there's going to be blank spaces, and I'll address those in a minute. With the base layer of the sky blocked in, it's time to start adding the details. Now, I started really dark with all of these. The yellow is the only one that's not super dark, and that's totally fine because I'm going to start going into it with detail. Now, I'm going to be starting with all of the blues. So I took what blue I had left, mixed a little bit of white into it, and then mixed even more white into it. So I'm going to use these three to start filling in some of the details. I'm starting with the medium blue on my palette, which is this one here. Now, this one's really only here in case these ones get too much, and I can kind of use this one to go back over it. So I'm just starting with the medium one, and I'm kind of doing these little dots and dashes following the curls. Now, I kind of thought of Starry Night when I was doing this, and I'm not really using the same colors, and I wanted it to be more of a daytime scene as opposed to a nighttime scene, but just kind of funky. So, I'm trying to work my way into lighter and lighter colors instead of using some of the dark ones. But I wanted the dark ones to be on the canvas first because they kind of show me where I missed some of the lighter spots in here where the canvas is showing through. So I know that when I start doing these dashes, I can kind of go over those spots and make sure they get covered with paint. Now, the trick to doing it this way is to kind of follow the direction of how things are going with the curls, and then also using a ton of layers. So I'm going to have to go through with a ton of colors. Like right now I'm using this kind of medium blue color. I'll have to use the dark blue to kind of bring some of the value into it. I have the even lighter blue. And then once I go into the purple, I'm going to have a blue-violet that I need to do before I go into the purple, because I'm going to do combinations of all these colors that go in between each one. So it's going to be a lot of layers. I don't want to see any flat paint by the time I'm done. I want it just to be completely full of all of these dashes. It's coming together, so it's time to start adding the lightest color blue I have. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of find the spots where the other color isn't and start to mark that in. Now, I do want to have some of that dark blue showing through, but I don't want to show any of the color I have down already. Just because I don't want it to be flat, I want everything to be these little dashes and dots. So after I kind of start to get this in, I might bring some of that dark color in, and if that's too much, I might go back into the medium, and I might even go back into the light before I'm happy with the coverage. I've decided to move on to yellow next. So on my palette I have the original yellow I put down on the canvas. I mixed it in with some more white to make a lighter color, and then I have just plain primary yellow over here. So I'm going to start with that because this one isn't on the canvas yet, and just kind of give it a little bit of depth by putting in the darker color, and then I'll go into the lighter color on top of it. I'm continuing to go through my colors, and my next one is the very lightest pink. There's a couple things I'm realizing, like there's way too much blue, and I think if I kind of bring in some of the darker blues here in between, not on the edges where they meet the swirls, but kind of in the deeper parts of them, that'll kind of help bring some depth to this. But I'm going to finish up doing the pink. I haven't done the purple yet, and then I can go ahead and start to refine things. So I've gotten this far and done some touch-ups, but I really think the yellow part is too dark compared to everything else. It needs to be lighter. So I've mixed up an even lighter yellow with more titanium white, and I'm just going to go ahead and do another series of dashes on top of it. I've lightened the yellows and I think they look a lot better. So the next thing I think I want to do is go ahead and start to darken some of the negative shapes that sit between the curls, just so you can kind of see them. Like right here, it kind of gets messy about what you're looking at. So I'm just going to take the original blue I had and kind of darken in some of that area. I might start down here because I've been starting kind of in this area, just by taking this blue and doing some more dashes. With the sky done, I need to start prepping my foreground things. So I need to go ahead and redraw in like the top of this building here because I want to make sure my line is straight, and I don't want to accidentally paint too far onto the sky or something. So I'm going to go ahead and redraw those. I'm going to tape in my horizon line to make sure it's perfectly horizontal and that I can just kind of fill it in. I want to make sure I know where these cliffs go so I don't accidentally paint too far or not enough or something like that. So I'm going to do all the prep work so I can start painting my foreground. I'm going to start by painting along the horizon line, and I've redrawn in part of these cliffs to make sure I can see them. And I want to make sure that I hide all of these colors underneath where the part of the sky is showing through. I don't want them to be visible. I don't want there to be some pink out here in the water. So I'm just going to kind of give them a base layer to hide that. I realized that my land wasn't quite in the right spot, so I went ahead and fixed that with this red chalk pastel. And now I'm going to start to fill in the ocean, and I'm starting by putting down some titanium white, just so it's kind of like wet with it, because I want this to be a lighter blue. And then I'm going to kind of add in a little bit of some ultramarine blue and kind of bring it down and do a deeper ultramarine blue here. Now I can't finish it just because of where it hits against the rocks. I need to do the rocks first. But it's kind of a weird space because I need to do the water back here above the rocks before I do the rocks, and then I have to finish the water down here. So up here I'm going to kind of do the water until it's finished, and then once I get over here it's going to kind of just be like I'm blocking it in. So it's going to be half finished, half blocked in. Filling in the water, I kind of went from the titanium white and went down into the ultramarine blue. I kind of tried to keep it a bit darker along the bottoms of the cliffs because they will be kind of casting a shadow and reflecting the cliff onto the ocean, so that's why I kind of have it that way. The next thing I need to fill in is all the cliffs. I need to start with the far away one and work my way towards the front one. So on my palette I have titanium white, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, Mars black, neutral gray 5, chromium green oxide, and phthalo green blue shade. So I'm going to be using these, the greens more so for the top of the cliffs, to kind of start to fill them in. And I'm starting far away, and I'm going to kind of just try and keep the same sort of technique down that I was using up here, but it's going to be a bit more realistic for these cliffs. I'm just going to kind of make it look rock-like by doing streaks of color and kind of bringing in some of the browns and blues, and then looking at my picture of the cliffs. I'm finding it easiest if I kind of fill in a base color for the cliff face, and because these ones over here are far away, I'm using a bit more gray in them than I am the brown. I'm making my way around the side here, and I'm using more and more brown in my gray colors, and before I was just using the plain gray, so I'm just adding more and more of my burnt sienna to it because it's starting to get more and more saturated the closer it gets towards the house. And then as I kind of fill it in, I do kind of the base layer first, and then I find it helps if I start with the darks, kind of doing the dark along the edge and then kind of filling in where the dark goes, working my way in towards the medium color that I have down already, and then working my way light. After I kind of do that, I start to fill in some of the greens to kind of see where they go, some of the moss and some of the grass on top. And then from there, I kind of just look at the rock and see if there's anything weird looking, anything that kind of bothers me, and then I kind of do a little bit of touch up. And that's kind of how I'm working my way this way. I'm using a smaller brush down here, and I'm kind of into the medium brush here. And then maybe in this cliff I might switch to a bigger brush. When I'm painting in the grass, I'm using the Phthalo green and a little bit of the Chromium Oxide because the Chromium Oxide is a bit more opaque. And then I just picked up a little bit of yellow so I can lighten up the tops, just to give them a little bit of lightness here. I finished filling in the cliffs, and the next thing I need to do is kind of fill in the top of this grass here. I had been doing the rest as I went along, but I kind of ran out of the green once I finished this up, so I cleaned off my palette just because I needed some space to work. And now I'm just going to go ahead and work on filling in this grass. Now this is a phthalo green mixed in with a little bit of Mars black, just because it's going to be kind of a base layer underneath everything else, and I just wanted a dark green down there. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fill this in first, and let it dry because I don't want my next layers to kind of blend in with it, I want them to sit on top. I had been using a fan brush trying to give kind of a grass texture, and in some places it worked out, in some places it didn't. So I've switched to a tiny little chisel brush here, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of tap in to fill in some of these spaces. And I will be using the chisel brush to bring in some of the brighter colors too. I still have more layers of the grass to fill in. Right now it's kind of flat, but in the meantime I thought I'd start blocking in the house. So I started to put down some of the yellow I'm going to be using for the siding here, and I'm realizing that the yellow is way too transparent. So when that happens, I tend to do kind of a primer coat of titanium white, especially to fill in all these bright colors from the sky, and some of my chalk marks will need to get filled in too, like down here. This blue will really show up under the paint. So I'm going to give it a base coat of the white, and then I'll go ahead and fill it with the yellow. I'm continuing to block in colors, and so for the roof I have a burnt sienna Mars black, and you can see this kind of mixed in with the yellow already down there because there was the yellow I had first put down, and that's totally fine because it will be that same yellow later, so it's just going to kind of blend in nicely. With the house blocked in, I'm going to jump back to the grass for a little bit, and I have this color here mixed with a little bit of primary yellow. You can kind of see the difference. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of block in some more grass strands, just a few little ones, and it's going to kind of look like the sun is catching them because they're a lot lighter than the background. Now I don't want to overwhelm this with them because I want them to kind of be individual so I can see the difference in all three of my colors. And because the fan brush put down so much paint right here, I might bring in some of the dark color too. I'm painting this back to front because I want to see all the tips of the grass, not the bottom parts. And if I do that, these ones back here, the bottoms get covered by everything in front, so I'm starting far away with this and working close up. For the floor, I repainted it in the base color, and then I took that brown and kind of streaked it throughout, and now I'm just taking some black to darken up the back corner. The floor is actually very wet because the paint is very, very thick, so I think I'm going to leave it alone for now, and I can't do the wall because that needs to be taped on the floor, and that's not going to happen right now. And I think the next thing I'm going to work on is doing this triangle. I'm going to go ahead and tape off this part of the house, and then kind of do the same treatment like I did down here. Give it a base layer of the same color, and then add some value and shading. Take the tape off, let it dry, and then later on go ahead and do the siding. For the gable, I've decided to lighten it up a little bit, just so it's a bit lighter of a yellow, and I did that because everything kind of below the horizon, basically everything except the sky, is a bit more realistic. I mean, I hand painted all of this grass, for example, so I decided to make it a little less bright and a bit more, I guess what you would see on a regular house. So I'm just giving it a first coat of that, and then I'm going to be shading it with some burnt sienna instead of a black, just because yellow and black don't really go together and make a good shade, so I'm going to be using burnt sienna for that instead. And on the sides of the gable here, there's going to kind of be the edge of the roof, and so I need to give a shadow for where that is, so I'm just going to kind of imagine where that's going to be when I put the shadow in. Because I can't do anything over here for now, I've decided to jump back and work on the ocean. Now, like I said before, it wasn't 100% done. I need to go ahead and start to add things. So the first thing I'm going to work on doing is kind of adding in the shadow or the reflection of these cliffs into the water and give it some more depth. Now, I know there's going to be some surface details with the waves and some of the foam on top, but I'm just starting with what's underneath. So I have some ultramarine blue on my palette, which is what I had put down here originally. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of get it wet by putting some more of this down. You can kind of see my chalk lines here. This is where I'm aiming to get these reflections in. And I also have some Mars Black on my palette just to darken it on the very, very inside pieces here, closest to the cliffs. Now, I don't have to paint 100% to the edge of the cliffs because the foam and the waves is going to cover kind of this little bit of a gap I leave. And I am going to do that just so I don't have to worry about getting super close and accidentally painting over some of the brown. I was going to do some shading with black, but I mixed up this teal green with some phthalo blue and the ultramarine blue I had on my palette, and I really like the look of it, so I think I'm going to go ahead and use this for the shade underneath here, and just kind of work this in the furthest away spaces. And remember, I'm not worried about the gap I'm leaving because that will be covered in the foam and the waves. I used a chalk pastel to draw on the siding lines here, so I'm just going to go ahead and fill those in. It's a burnt sienna with this original yellow I had here. So I'm just going to take a tiny little brush and be super careful filling this in. Next up is the floorboards, so I've just mixed up a darker version of the floor color and I'm just going to go straight on top of them. Before I had put the shadows in for the water, I had actually went ahead and drawn the waves, and then I realized I had to do the shadows first, but now that these are done and dry, I can go ahead and start to redraw in the waves. So they're all going to kind of sit along the base of the cliffs, and I'm going to have them come out horizontally a little bit, and just kind of come outwards from the shore. To fill in the waves, it's going to take a few layers until I'm to pure titanium white. So I've mixed up the color I was using kind of in here with just a touch of white to make it a little bit lighter, and then I'm going to start to bring in some of the waves. And then I'm going to keep working it lighter and lighter and lighter until I'm into pure titanium white, and then I'll just kind of finish off the highlights with it. I'm starting to think that my blue is a bit too blue and I need a little bit more green in it, so as I'm kind of getting lighter, I'm adding just a little bit more green to the waves. I've taped off the wall of the house, and I left this one open just because it is kind of cracked and it's not a straight line. There's no point in taping it. Now over here, because I still have to do this yellow, I didn't bother like taping that perfectly or not taping it at all. It's not going to matter just because I can go ahead and repaint these yellow parts that stick out when I do that side of the house. So I went ahead and tested a new gray because the one I had is gone. I don't have any more of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of start from here. I'm going to start with a lighter color on the edge, and then I'm going to fade towards the mid color you see here, and then fade towards the dark on the far side. I painted the light color a little bit and tried to feather it out. Now I have my medium gray, and I'm just going to go ahead kind of from the middle and work my way towards this and try and make a nice transition between the two. I filled in a new base color for the roof, and all I basically did was when I retaped it off, this triangle had been a bit taller than where the roof used to be, so I just made sure the tape met with the top of that triangle. So now that that's all set and drying, before I go into doing the shingles, I noticed that the cliff looked a little bit funky from about here all the way to the corner of the painting, so I've drawn in where I need to fix it. I basically just need to put a little bit of a lip on it because all of these cliffs kind of have this overhang lip, and I'm just going to change that so they all have that down here. Before I put any cracks or details on the wall, I want to go ahead and kind of mark in the baseboard, and because again it's a straight line, I'm going to go ahead and tape it off. I've drawn in the cracks in the wall, so I'm going to go ahead and start to fill them in with paint. Now the lighter color I have here is going to kind of be on the left side of all of the cracks, and the darker color is going to be on the right side because it sticks up, has a little bit of a shadow, and then the light kind of hits the next part over. So that's how I'm going to go ahead and fill these in. I've blocked in the edges of the roof, so I'm just going to go ahead and fill those in solid white first, just because there's a little bit of sky showing through. I wanted to make sure I covered everything and a little bit of the grass, and I don't want it to be kind of different underneath, so I'm going to prime it with white first, and then it is a lighter yellow than the siding, so after it's white, I'm going to go ahead and kind of mix up a lighter version of this color and fill it in. I've started to draw on the furniture, and I started by drawing a very low cube, something kind of compressed down. And then I put little feet on it, and you won't be seeing this one because the couch will be in the way, so I'm not worried about it. But the bed kind of rests on the platform, so I'm using some of the brown I had down here with a little bit more burnt sienna so it stands out from everything else. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fill in the base part of the bed first, the platform the mattress sits on, and add some value to it, and then work on filling in the mattress. Now I have drawn the mattress very, very square, and it is kind of rounded because of the blanket or whatever, so I'm just going to kind of round those corners when I paint it. To fill in the mattress, I just mixed up a few colors I had on my palette to kind of make this dirty yellow color. I had some of this I mixed up, I had the brown I used originally for the platform here, and then I added a little bit of the green from the grass, just to kind of make a dirty mess of colors. So this is going to be the mattress color, and as I fill it in, when I kind of get to the corners, instead of just going straight up to a point, I'm just going to kind of round it onto the top. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of fill it in, add some value to it, with like the rips and the tears, and there's a spring coming out of it. I'm just going to kind of add a little bit with the value to kind of make it look that way. The spring is going to end up being a different color, but I'll fill that in later. I refined the lines for the couch so I could start to fill it in, and on my palette I've mixed up a grayish brown red color. Now, when I was trying to think about what color this would be, I was looking at the sprite, and that color is here. So I looked at it and I thought red. That was kind of my first thought. But it wasn't like a barn red or like a stop sign red. It kind of had a bit of a gray to it. So I started by mixing the red and the gray, and that didn't quite feel right. So then I added a little bit of brown to it, and that kind of fixed it. So with this reddish brownish gray color, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the couch using the brown and then some of the white to add in the value and details. Once I have the value for the couch done, I'm just going to dirty it up with some of my darker shades, and I'm just going to kind of scribble in some stains. And then I'm just going to soften them with my original color. With the furniture done, they kind of look like they're floating, so I need to add a shadow onto the ground plane for them. So I'm just going to kind of fill that in underneath the bed here with the gap, and then just a little bit along the edge of the couch because it does sit tight to the floor. The transition between the grass and the house is a little bit too perfect and too straight of a line, so I'm just going to go through all the grass colors and just kind of blend them together by bringing some grass on top of the house. I'm just bringing it straight up using the same technique I was doing before. To fill in the roof, I'm going to go ahead and start to use this burnt sienna to fill in these rectangles I've drawn. Now I'm not filling in the lines, that's going to be burnt umber, because that's going to be the shadow, but everything else is going to be burnt sienna, so it's going to be lighter. The roof is done, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of tap up some of these chalk marks, and there's just tiny little dots of white that I didn't pick up with my paintbrush as I was painting it, so I'm making sure I'm tapping and not scrubbing. Normally I kind of scrub a little bit harder, but that's when the paint's dry, and this is just a little bit wet still. As for my jazz player here, I think earlier I may have called him a saxophone player because when I was planning the painting, I had thought he was a saxophone player, and actually Steven pointed out he's a trumpet player, and I was looking at the sprite and it kind of looks like the instrument is down, so I thought saxophone. But then he pointed out he's a trumpet player. And then I started to draw him in, and then I started to fill him in with a liquid black because I find with a tiny brush, it's a lot easier to paint with the liquid paints when I'm trying to get like a nice tiny little details. And I started to make his head a little too big, but as it turned out, it was kind of a happy accident because I like how it looks, and he kind of looks like one of the little sprites in Earthbound because their heads are so big. But I do want to touch up how all of these yellow curls, I want them to kind of go into the bell of the instrument more. So I'm just going to take a little bit of light yellow and white and kind of just pull them into the bell. And we're done! We have the trumpet player on the cliffs of Onett. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a print or a poster or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.